For our finger knit hat, you will need about 125 yards of bulky yarn. You want it to be soft because you're going to be doing a lot of finger knitting and you're going to wear it on your head, so you want it to be cozy. You also need a large-eyed darning needle. Your yarn needs to be able to go through the eye of this needle. It does not need to be sharp. It can be dull. Another thing you need is the PDF pattern, which you can find a link to below in the notes. You're going to print this out and assemble it. So you'll print out your pattern, you will cut it on the dotted lines, and you'll tape your pieces together. I've numbered them for you to make it pretty easy. And I've also printed a little square here. This square should measure 1 inch by 1 inch, and that is how you know your printer printed out the pattern correctly. Is after you have taped this together, you're going to trace it on a piece of cardboard. And then you cut out this nice cardboard template. And this is what you're going to sew all of your finger knitting around. You need it before you get knitting though, because you're going to check your length of finger knitting as you go on this template. So let's learn how to finger knit across all 4 fingers. I have my yarn. The first step is have your palm of your hand facing you, facing up to your ceiling or towards your face. You're going to use your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you're going to finger knit across your left hand. And if you're left-handed, you're going to finger knit across your right hand. So we have our yarn in the palm of our hand, and we're going to close our thumb so we're holding it in place. And now we're going to weave the yarn over and under our fingers, all 4 fingers. So my first one, I'm starting under, over, under, over. Now I've reached the end, so I have to wrap around my pinky, and I'm going to go over the next finger, under, over, wrap around pointer, over, under, over, wrap around, over, under, over. So you go over, under until you have 2 loops on each finger. Once you have 2, we're going to start on one side. You can start with your pinky or your pointer. You take the bottom loop and you're going to jump over the top loop and go all the way across. So I have, this is my bottom loop. I'm going to take it and jump over the top loop and off my finger. Bottom loop, jump, and my last finger, jump over. I can push all my little rings down. Get some yarn ready and go back across again. Once you've gone across once, you can take this little guy, get rid of it. Just put it in the back. I have already gone around my pointer finger, so I'm just going to start with over, under, over, around, over, under, over. Now I already have 2 loops on each finger, so I can bend my finger a little bit as I do this, pick up the bottom loop, jump over and off. Push your little loops back down, and let's do it together a few more times. So this project can take a little while. One question I get is, what do I do with all these little loops when I need to stop working for a minute. So what I like to do is grab just a pencil or a pen with this little clip on it. What you're gonna do is you're gonna slip each loop off your finger and onto the pencil or pen. So just slip it off. Put that loop one by one and then off your finger onto the pen or pencil and scooch these 4 stitches down under the clip of your pencil, and it will hold them in place. So when you need to come back to your work, you just need to put it back on your hand the right way. So we have 2 directions, and this is going to come in handy for when you're sewing your hat together. So on one side, I have these V's. I have 1 stripe of V's, 2 stripe of V's, 3 stripes. And then they have these bars in between them. On the other side, it looks different. On this side, I only have bars. So I want the side with just the bars to go on the outside of my hand. So the bars are on the outside of my hand, and the V's, the little upside down V's, those lay against the back of my hand. I want to make sure I have my long piece of yarn is going to be by my first finger. So this loop just slips onto this finger. And then the second finger takes the next stitch. And the third. And the fourth. You just slip those little loops right back onto your fingers. And you just double check. You want to see these bars on the outside of your hand. And then you can just get right back to finger knitting wherever you left off. So now you need to finger knit for a while. You're going to use almost your whole ball of yarn. You are going to finger knit until you can wrap it all the way around your cardboard template. So after you have just done a whole pile of finger knitting, we should be able to wrap this around our template, and then we know it's time to cast off our finger knitting. So to check if you have finger knit enough, just take your knitting off, slip it onto your handy marker or pen or pencil that has a little clip to hold your stitches, and then grab the end where you started. And you're going to, with these bars, the side with the bars facing up, loosely wrap this around your template. This is how you're going to sew it up. Right now we just want to see if we have knit enough. So I've wrapped my yarn around and it reaches the top. It's okay if you can see a little cardboard in between. When we sew our pieces together, they stretch out a little bit while we're sewing. So this is a good example. This is totally done. We can cast off our finger knitting now. Okay, so here is where we are. I wound all my finger knitting into a great big ball, and then this is the yarn I have left to sew up in my hat. And if you have a little extra, you get to make a pom-pom and put that on top if you'd like. Casting off is super easy. All we do is we start on one end. I like to start at my pinky. I grab this loop and I put it onto the next finger, its neighbor. And now I have 2 loops on that finger, and I'm going to finger knit. Now I take this loop and move it onto its neighbor, moving across my stitches. And now I finger knit that stitch. I have 2 stitches left, so I'm going to take this stitch, move it onto my pointer finger, finger knit. I have 1 stitch left. So I'm going to pull a long tail of yarn. You can make this about a yard and you can start sewing with it in a minute. Cut your yarn, take the end of your yarn and you're going to put it through this loop. So I can safely take this loop off my finger, stretch it out a little. I just take this end, put it through the loop, and pull the yarn through. And it should tighten up the bottom of your work. So find your side with the bars, and we're going to wrap that all the way around our template, just like we did when we were testing. So now we are to our sewing. If you left about a yard on either end of your finger knitting, you can use that. If you didn't, you want to take about 1 yard of yarn, thread it onto your needle, tie it on to the end of your finger knitting, and we're going to start slowly sewing our way all the way around this hat. So I just need to connect this little end right here. And so my goal is I'm going to be sewing into these loops on the edge. If you look carefully, you see all these V's, right? And our bars are hiding in the middle there. So I just want to take this little outside loop, and that's what I'm pulling my yarn through. And so I'm going to weave my needle. So I'm going to go from the top through this loop, down a row, and I'm going to grab this little loop, pull my yarn through. And so I'm just going 1 stitch through each little loop. So here's my next loop. I'm going to come from the bottom. I'm going to find my matching loop up here. It's right here. Grab that loop, pull my yarn through. You're not pulling too tight. So now I'm going to step over to the next loop right here and then go down into the loop below it. So I'm kind of weaving my needle up and down, up and down. So now I'm down, find my next loop, put my needle through it, find its friend above it, go into that loop, pull my yarn through. And you're keeping your yarn pulled, but you don't want it too tight. If you pull it too tight, it does this. It gathers it up. You don't want that. So when I get to my last stitch right here on the edge, I just take my work and I carefully flip it over. And now I need to sew across the bottom here. And I'm just going to keep spiraling up all the way around the hat until I reach the top. So when you start to run out of yarn on your needle, we're just going to tie it off and tie on a new piece. So I like to loop it into the same stitch just around 1, 2, 3 times, and then put your needle through that last loop and then pull the yarn through, and that makes a nice tight knot. You can weave that in later. Now I'm going to take my ball of yarn. I'm going to cut off about 1 yard of yarn, thread my needle, and then the easiest way to get this back on here, go back into that last stitch, pull your yarn through, and tie the tail to your long piece of yarn. Just loop them, make a loop, take the tail, put it through the loop, tighten it up. Do it 1 more time to be safe, and now you just keep going. So when you get to the very tippy top, sew 3 times in your last stitch, pull your needle through, pull it tight. If you have some yarn left, don't cut it, we're gonna use it. If not, tie on another piece of yarn right at the top. So you have this top open here. Scooch a little bit of your hat over the edge of your cardboard. And what you're gonna do before you take your hat off is you're gonna take your needle and your yarn and you're gonna do a big running stitch at the very edge of your hat. Big stitches. This is called a running stitch. I'm just going down through my work, bringing my needle back up. You want big stitches because you're about to pull this tight and it's going to gather the top of your hat. Last stitch. Okay. Now slip your hat off your piece of cardboard very carefully. Don't get stuck anywhere. Take your yarn that you just wove through the top here and pull it. And what it does is it closes up the top of your hat. Don't pull too tight. You do not want to break your piece of yarn you just wove through. So gather it up until you can't gather it anymore. And then I'm going to pull it tight and you want to guess. Sew 3 times in the same place, just through whatever stitch is on the edge here. 2, 3. Pull your yarn through the loop. Cut your yarn and leave a little tail. So you're gonna have a whole bunch of little stringy pieces of yarn in here, but first you should try your hat on. So flip your hat right side out and marvel at your beautiful finger knit hat. And try it on. So after you've tried your hat on, you just need to deal with all these little strings and ends on the inside. You just want to weave them into a few stitches before you cut them. Thank you so much for working on this project with me. I hope you had fun. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe for more fun crafting videos.